The pit was already rolling when the sun came up, the smoke ribboning over the parking lot like a ghost that couldn't decide whether to leave. Brisket was on at 2:25, ribs were rubbed down, and I was in that quiet part of morning I loved. Before the first truck door slammed, before the register beeped, before someone asked for extra sauce like it was a sin to taste meat. The neighborhood behind the shop was waking up slow. A kid coasted his bike through the alley, dragging his sneakers to brake. A train moaned somewhere west toward San Marcos. If you've never lived in Central Texas, you think the heat is the story. It isn't. It's the way the day smells like mesquite and diesel and a little bit of last night's regret. My name doesn't matter as much as hers did. Emily. She was the reason the doors ever opened, and she was the reason I kept unlocking them after the world folded her up and took her somewhere I couldn't follow. We met in high school, Lockhart, where barbecue is a religion and teenagers learn to drive on farm roads. Emily worked at a farm stand off 23. I used to buy peaches I didn't need just to hear her laugh when I miscounted change on purpose. She was the kind of woman who could turn a line of customers into a family reunion. I was the kind of guy who brought a pocket knife to fix the squeak in the cooler door without being asked. We married before our parents finished getting used to the idea. By 21, we signed a lease on a squat brick building between a muffler shop and a pawn place, the kind of strip center you drive past, without seeing until the smoke hooks you by the nose. We peeled old linoleum off the floor, painted over nicotine yellow walls, and scavenged tables from church sales. She found an old offset smoker in a guy's backyard in Luling and made me promise I could make it sing. I did. Eventually. We called it Third Rail BBQ because Emily said the two rails most folks run on are work and home, and if you don't build a third, you'll fry yourself on the same track. The third rail was supposed to be joy. And in those first months, when the doors stayed open on hope and fumes, joy came in the shape of strangers licking sauce off their wrists and saying they hadn't tasted ribs like that since their granddad's pit in Uvalde. We learned everything the hard way. The lights died mid-rush, the hood fan coughed and quit on a Saturday and smoked us out like bees. Emily stood on a chair to apologize to a roomful of hungry people, and they clapped for her like she'd sung them a song. Word of mouth is better than any kind of marketing. It carried us farther than we deserved. If I could freeze time, I'd slice a piece off that first year and live in it. Emily at the register, head thrown back laughing. Me at the pit, pretending I didn't hear her flirt with every old man who called her young lady, like she hadn't been running circles around them since birth. On Sundays after church, kids sprinted through the parking lot, chasing each other around pickup trucks while their parents drank sweet tea like medicine. We were too busy for anniversaries and too poor for vacations, so we took walks by the Blanco River at night and called it Paris. Emily would skip rocks and tell me she wanted a big Thanksgiving one day, with more food than the table could hold and a kid asleep on her shoulder by the time pie came out. I'd nod and say, "We'll get there," and I believed it, the way you believe drive-in movies will always exist because they should. She had this way of making our cracked tile kitchen feel like a magazine, a sprig of rosemary in a jar by the sink, a hand-lettered chalkboard that said, "Taste first, sauce second." It wasn't decoration, it was a world view. Don't drown flavor. Let things be what they are, only better for the time you gave them. The guy who killed her had 3 prior DUIs and a lawyer who liked cufflinks. Emily closed with the night manager and drove up 80 with the deposit in her purse. He ran the light by the feed store and cut her sedan in half. The cop who knocked on my door said it must have been quick, like that was supposed to paste my heart back together. If you've ever watched the line of a heartbeat go flat in a single sentence, you don't forget the sound your own body makes trying not to hear it. The funeral smelled like lilies and grease. People lined up out the church doors like a Saturday rush. I stood there shaking hands, saying thank you to casseroles, nodding at stories I half remembered. Grief shrank the world to the distance between my thumb and the lighter I kept flicking without lighting. My mother pressed a tissue into my hand like it could stop a leak in a dam. After the casseroles, there was the silence. The restaurant was a room full of ghosts. Emily's handwriting on the prep lists, her sweater over the back of the office chair, her lipstick still in the drawer where we kept batteries and rubber bands. Selling felt like betrayal. Closing felt like a different kind. So I unlocked the doors and went to work because work is the only prayer I know that God answers in plain English. People tell you to take time off. People who've never held a thing afloat with both hands. I kept the doors open. The regulars came in quiet, like church, like they were afraid to laugh too loud and scare me. When they did laugh, I felt the room breathe. On days I couldn't, Danny breathed for me. Danny arrived with a toolbox and a ledger. He'd been my friend since sophomore year, skateboards, detentions, the whole arc. Emily called us the two dumbest smart boys in Caldwell County, which was mostly generous. He'd helped us file our LLC, set up the Point A of Foo sale, talk to suppliers without sounding like we were born yesterday. After she died, he said, "I got you. You don't do this alone." We made it official. He took 25% for handling books, permits, payroll, the mess of numbers that panicked me. I kept the pit, the menu, the crew. He kept me upright. On nights when grief tried to swallow me, he'd drag me to the Grackle in Austin, feed me a shot and a cheap beer, and tell stories until I laughed. He didn't ask me to move on. He just stood there so I didn't fall over. He was good at the parts I hated. The calls with landlords about roof leaks, the emails to the health inspector, the way he could talk a delivery driver into turning around after they missed our exit. He'd show me spreadsheets like they were maps to buried treasure. I'd stare at blocks of numbers the way a dog stares at a ceiling fan. He'd grin. "That's why you hired me, pit boss." Those first 12 months after Emily died were survival dressed as routine. We made rent, we paid vendors, we kept the lights on. Lockhart folks are loyal. They kept us afloat by making third rail part of their calendar. Tuesday brisket tacos, Friday ribs, Saturday family trays stacked like wood piles. People started bringing out-of-femtown friends to our spot, and for a second, life looked like something that might say yes again. The first time I saw Nora, she was arguing with a linen guy over napkin sizes like the fate of the world rode on a hem. She worked PR and events for a hill country winery and wanted to rent our patio for a release party. She was all sun-freckle confidence and a blazer too nice for our parking lot. She shook my hand like a plan and said, "Your place feels honest." We did the party. It was a mess in the best way. Live music that started too loud and ended with strangers slow dancing in a warm breeze that smelled like peach cobbler. Nora ran the chaos like a conductor. At midnight, she sat on a milk crate in the alley, heels dangling, eating burnt ends with her fingers and laughing every time sauce dripped down her wrist. "You ever sleep?" she asked. "Not when there's work," I said. "That's not the same as no," she said, and bumped my shoulder with hers. I took her to the Blanco on a Tuesday and we walked until our shoes found mud. She told me New Orleans had taught her to stay through storms and that Austin taught her to leave before a bar tab turned into rent. She didn't tiptoe around Emily's name. She said it once, careful, and then understood. That careful didn't bother me. It was silence that did. We started small. Coffee runs that accidentally turned into breakfast. A Sunday antique fair where she haggled for a blue enamel bread box and then left it on my counter like it had been there since the Nixon administration. I always said I'd know when I was ready by whether the house felt less empty with someone else's toothbrush in it. Turns out, the toothbrush was the least of it. It was the sound of someone humming while they folded dish towels. It was the way she locked the front door and tested it twice, like she was watching my back without saying it out loud. I didn't ask her to move in. It happened the way fog happens, quietly. Then suddenly you can't see the driveway without it. She kept a spare blazer on the coat tree. Her favorite mug lived above the microwave. When she got a dog from the shelter, a brown-eyed mutt named Chai who hated skateboards and loved the smell of fat, she acted surprised when I built a gate to keep him from the pit. "You're handy," she said. "I had to be," I said. "Everything else is stubbornness." Danny liked her. At least, that's what he said. He teased me about finally joining the living, about buying tickets to shows we wouldn't actually attend. He and Nora planned a couple of wine and a brisket pairings that packed the patio and doubled our Tuesday sales. He started dropping by later, staying longer, finishing beers with us after we counted the drawer. If you've never rebuilt a heart, you should know the first beams go in crooked. You learn to love the light anyway. For a while, it was good light. We started talking about expansion, another smoker, maybe a small trailer by the river for summer crowds. Danny brought spreadsheets and pro formas. Nora brought sponsors and press. I brought meat people would fight their cousin for. We took a photo for a magazine write-up. Nora stood between us, one hand on each of our shoulders like we were the two ends of a story she was telling. When the issue came out, people commented, "Power Trio." I printed the page and taped it in the office. It took me a long time to notice how my smile didn't reach my eyes. Red flags don't wave. They sit very still and dare you to call them curtains. Nora started answering texts face down. She blamed clients. "Wineries never sleep." Fine. Danny began scheduling late-night vendor reconciliations. I hadn't needed the first 4 years. Invoices lagged, a week here, 3 days there. The bank balance felt thinner than the register suggested. One Thursday, a check to our rub supplier bounced, and I almost swallowed my tongue. We'd never bounced anything. I called Danny. He said it was a posting delay, something with the ACH batch. You know how banks are. He smoothed it over with a fee and a joke. Old man bank still thinks we're teenagers with a lemonade stand. I nodded like that made sense, but that night I printed the last 6 months of statements and sat on the office floor with a highlighter and a headache. Emily used to say the truth leaves footprints. I wasn't sure what I was seeing yet, just smudges that didn't match the shoes we wore. Nora started spending more afternoons at the shop, helping. She and Danny got good at arguing over tiny things, the shade of tablecloths, the wording on an Instagram post. Their voices would rise, bodies leaning in, then snap back to laughs when I walked in. I told myself they were both loud people. I told myself loud people sometimes sounded like fire alarms. Once, I came back from dropping ice at the convenience store and heard them in the office. Not words, cadence. That spiral of heat people make when they forget the walls aren't as thick as shame. When I opened the door, they were 4 feet apart talking about napkins again like napkins had ever mattered that much. I stood there a beat too long. Nora asked if I was okay. I said, headache, and held up a bag of Advil like a communion wafer. The night I knew, the weather finally broke. After a month of heat that made the asphalt go soft under tires, a storm rolled in from the hill country with that electricity you can taste. We closed early and sent the crew home with foil-wrapped ribs, the kind of generosity that costs you $10 and buys you loyalty forever. I stayed to clean the slicer because no kid under 25 can be trusted with a blade that sharp. Danny said he'd lock up after he finished quick reconciliations. Nora said she'd help him because the linen vendor messed up counts and she had the numbers in her head. They told me to go. I said I'd be right behind them. They didn't argue too hard. I took Chai out in the rain and walked him around back. He hates loud thunder but loves puddles, so we moved slow. The office blinds were half closed. The light inside was that buttery yellow that makes everything look like nostalgia. I wasn't trying to see anything. I wasn't even ready to see anything. I saw enough. Not a kiss, not a clinch. Bodies have a way of telling the truth without touching. The distance between them was the distance between people who had already crossed a line and were pretending they hadn't. The way Nora lifted her chin when she laughed. The way Danny looked at her hands like they were already his problem to hold. I didn't walk in. I didn't bang on glass. I wrapped Chai's leash around my wrist and felt my pulse in my palm. When Nora got home, rain in her hair, she smelled like starch and my cologne. I'm not proud of that detail, but honesty is rarely polite. She cuddled up under my arm, talking about the storm, and fell asleep on my chest while my eyes tracked the ceiling fan like it was a second hand. I lay there and counted the blades and remembered every time Emily told me to look at the smoke, not the flames, to see what was really burning. Confrontations look clean in movies. In life, the sharpest knife is paperwork. I started with access. I reset admin credentials on our bank and POS. I added alerts no one else could see. I paid a forensic bookkeeper named Marisol in cash to come in as a consultant for our expansion. She was 40-something, mean to printers, and allergic to small talk. She sat at the office computer with a thermos of Café de Ola and made the numbers sing like they'd been hiding sheet music. Within a week, she had a board on my wall with postiches that looked like a map of a city I didn't recognize. Duplicate vendor IDs, rounded transfers that would make a tax auditor smile like a shark, and a consulting LLC I'd never heard of. CNS Events Consulting that happened to coordinate a suspicious number of our invoices at a healthy premium. Who owns CNS? I asked. Marisol didn't look up. Who do you think? Danny? She finally turned, capped her pen. Danny signs. But the mailing address is Nora's P.O. box from her winery days. Cute. It's a particular ache when your stomach drops and nothing else does. I could taste pennies. I could taste the rain from the night before. Don't do anything stupid, Marisol said, as if reading the shape of my shoulders. Stupid is loud. We're going to be quiet. We were quiet. I got an attorney, Henderson, old school, the kind of guy who wears a bow tie unironically and knows every judge between Austin and Seguin. He walked me through partnership law like we were touring a museum of levers. You gave him 25% and operational authority, he asked. On paper, I said. In practice, I've run everything. Good, he said. We'll treat him like a manager who defrauded his employer. He built me a playbook, Freeze access, document everything, notify banks, file to dissolve the partnership under cause, and invoke the bad actor clause he himself had insisted we add 4 years ago when my head was all smoke and sorrow. You did that? I asked. He smiled. You hired me when you were smart enough to know you were dumb. Past you deserves a beer. The day I served Danny, the sky was too blue for what it contained. Henderson arranged a meeting at the shop before we opened. Marisol sat in the corner with her stack of printouts like a librarian who had caught you writing in a book. Nora came to help translate numbers, which made Henderson's left eyebrow climb his forehead. Danny walked in with his usual swagger and a paper cup coffee. He saw the papers on the desk and didn't see a thing. He always thought he could outtalk any problem. Mornin', he said. What's the fire? No fire, I said. Just housekeeping. Henderson slid the packet across. Mr. Bennett, he said in that voice that belongs in tilely floored courtrooms, you are hereby notified of a petition to dissolve the partnership for cause, including but not limited to embezzlement, self-dealing, and breach of fiduciary duty. Danny laughed the way a man laughs when he hopes you're joking. He flipped. He read. His face went white around the mouth. That's cute, he said finally. You gonna call the cops on your best friend? I'm going to protect my business, I said, which used to be ours. Nora tried to snatch the papers. Henderson tapped them with a fountain pen. Please don't touch exhibits that don't have your name on them, Miss Clark. You'll have your own set soon enough. Her eyes cut to mine like knives. You think I need him? She asked, chin up. I think you needed our vendor list and a way to bill them, I said. I'm not a yeller. My voice sounds like a man reading weather reports. I don't know if that made it worse or better. Nora's mouth curled. Danny did the math he should have done months ago and realized his passwords were already dead and his access already gone. You're overreacting, he said, which is something men say right before a gavel falls. We can fix this. You already fixed it, I said, for yourself. Henderson slid a second paper, a notice to vacate the office and a list of property to be surrendered. We can do this clean, he said, or we can do this with deputies. Your pick. Danny picked up his coffee, realized his hands were shaking, set it back down. You're going to ruin me, he said. You did that, I said. I'm just turning on the lights. Nora tried to pivot into charm. Look, we all made mistakes under pressure, she said. Let's be adults and... Being an adult is the problem, Henderson said mildly. Adults sign contracts. The fallout came the way grease fires do. Sudden, hot, trying to climb walls. The petition became an order faster than I'd expected. The bank sided with me because banks love signatures and I had the right ones. Suppliers were angry but practical. They'd been burned by CNS and were relieved the leak had a plug. Marisol found a dozen more small thefts and one large one. Henderson turned them into lines in a document that sounded dry enough to eat. Danny's mother called my mother. That was the worst part. There is a tone old women get when a boy has made himself a problem. My mother said, he has to learn. Danny's mother said, boys make mistakes. My mother said, he made choices. Nora posted a note-sap confession that wasn't. It was all passive voice and, we were under a lot of stress, and if I hurt anyone, and half a Bible verse that didn't even fit. People are smarter than influencers think. The comments were kinder to me than I deserved, and crueler to her than I asked for. I turned my phone off and got back to work. I never called the police. Henderson did what lawyers do with men who have assets and bad habits. He made it expensive. Danny sold his truck. He sold the boat he never used. He moved back in with his brother for a minute. It stretched. He texted me once, a paragraph that read like a drunk apology. I didn't reply. Silence is a language. I was fluent now. As for Nora, she kept her head up at first. She showed up at the shop twice in sunglasses like a disguise could change gravity. The second time, I had our manager meet her at the door with a box of her things and a letter I'd paid Henderson to write. No trespass, no contact. She cried like an actress for an audience that had left the theater. When she realized the stage was empty, she left too. She moved to Houston. Someone told me she's in medical sales now. Someone else told me she married a dentist. Both can be true. I wish her health more than I wish her happiness. Happiness takes care of itself for people who can bruise others without looking down. You'd think the worst part would be losing them. It wasn't. It was losing the version of me that believed I couldn't. I doubled down on the restaurant. We added a Sunday brunch that made old men from church declare war on cholesterol. I hired 2 high school kids who reminded me of me and Danny before we forgot the difference between mischief and malice. I gave the crew raises. We comped cops and nurses without making a show of it. We threw a fundraiser for Mothers Against Drunk Driving on Emily's birthday, and I cried into a smoker where no one could see me. Third Rail got a write-up in a food blog that doesn't give a damn about your feelings. The writer said our brisket wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and I taped that sentence to the office wall because that's the only Michelin star I'll ever need. We started shipping frozen sausages statewide. A guy from Dallas tried to buy us. I said no without thinking. Some things you don't sell, some things you hold until your knuckles ache. At night, the bed was still a canyon. I filled it with books I didn't read and a dog who snored like he'd smoked his own ribs. Friends told me to get back out there, as if dating were a treadmill you could step onto and outpace your ghosts. I tried once. A woman from the farmer's market who wore linen and kindness. I made her dinner and felt like a thief the whole time. I walked her to her car and didn't kiss her goodbye. She squeezed my hand and said, "You don't owe me a performance." I think I loved her for that sentence and no other. I started running again. Early mornings, County Road 672, the kind of run where the sky is still deciding if it's blue. A trucker would honk sometimes. I'd wave like a man who knows he looks ridiculous in compression socks. My lungs learned to forgive me for the smoke I feed them. My legs learned that moving forward is simpler than standing still and arguing with ghosts. Some nights I talk to Emily, not out loud, not like a man who's lost his grip, just comments. I tell her when the smoke runs blue the way she taught me to look for. I tell her how kids color on butcher paper like it's a canvas, and mothers lick their thumbs to wipe sauce off their cheeks and everybody pretends not to notice. I tell her I figured out her cornbread trick, finally, the extra buttermilk, the cast iron preheated hotter than sin. And I tell her about Nora, but only the first half. The second half isn't a story I want to give to the dead. The dead have enough to carry. People ask if I miss Danny. Of course I do. The boy we were. The man who jumped a car battery for me in a Boogie's parking lot at midnight. The friend who sat outside my house the week after Emily died and smoked cheap cigars with me until our throats hurt because he didn't know what else to do, and neither did I. Missing someone and letting them back into your life are not the same verb. Sometimes I imagine what I would say if I saw him in Huey B by the bakery. I think I'd ask how his mother is. I think I'd tell him the truth is a muscle he should try using before it atrophies. Then I'd buy a pecan pie I don't need and give it to the cashier to share in the break room because kindness feels better when it's anonymous. The day the state finalized the dissolution, Henderson called and said, "You're free." I said, "That's not how freedom tastes." He said, "You'll acquire the flavor." We threw a party that night, not because of paperwork, but because the calendar said the first cold front of the year deserved respect. The patio lights glowed. A guy with a guitar sang Townes Van Zandt songs off-key, and nobody cared. I stood at the edge of it and watched a woman cut her husband's ribs for him because he'd broken his wrist changing a tire. I watched a teenage boy stare at a girl across a table, the way he will remember 30 years from now like it was the first time he knew his heart could move. I took the long way home down Church Street, where trees lean in like eavesdroppers. The air smelled like smoke and wet leaves. At a red light, I realized my shoulders were not up by my ears. It had been months since I had noticed the weight of my own breathing. The light turned green before I needed it to. If this is where you came for revenge, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I didn't salt their earth. I didn't text anyone's mother's screenshots. I didn't key a car. I did boring adult things, and then I made more food. Justice and revenge look identical from across a parking lot. Up close, justice is the one that stops when the truth has been counted. Revenge keeps walking until everything is ash. The restaurant is fine. Better than fine most days. We're still a Stripe Center miracle between a muffler shop and a pawn place. The pit still rolls. Men still ask for extra sauce. I still say, try it first. Me? I'm all right. I'm not who I was before. I don't know that I'll ever be married again. Trust is a bridge I'm still surveying for cracks. But I have a life I can stand inside without wondering which part will fall on me. Most nights, that's enough. If you're listening and you're standing in a kitchen that isn't yours anymore, wondering if you're crazy, look at the ledger. Not the one with numbers, the one with actions. People write their truth there, whether they mean to or not. When you find it, you don't have to scream. You can just turn on the lights and unlock your own door. Smoke doesn't forget. It threads itself through everything: shirts, hair, memory. It clings even after you shower, even after you move, even after the sign over the door changes. It's proof something burned and didn't kill you. I unlock the door most mornings before sunrise. I turn on the pit. I let the smoke find me. I get to work. That's where the peace lives, not in what they lost when they betrayed me, but in what I kept when I didn't betray myself. All right, that's where we'll end it today. If you enjoyed the story, go ahead and smash that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe for more crazy stories coming your way.